Meanwhile, former African heads of state have called for greater urgency in addressing the continent's debt and solvency challenges. The leaders, in a unified effort to push for a comprehensive debt solution, have launched the African Leaders Debt Relief Initiative. And joining me to look into how this initiative will contribute to reshaping the global financial system is Patrick Njoroge, former governor of the Central Bank of Kenya. Thank you so much for your time, Governor. So the African Leaders Debt Relief Initiative was launched today. And what's interesting is that behind it are former presidents of Africa. So really just emphasizing the persistence of this debt crisis in Africa. So please give us an overview of the uphill battle that has led to this declaration at this time.
The specific initiative before us, it recognizes where we are in terms of debt and debt service. We are in the middle of the worst debt crisis in 80 years. In terms of debt service payments, 2024 was the costliest year. And in terms of, let's say, debt service to revenues or debt service to export earnings in our countries, this was really the highest it's been in more than 30 years. And at the same time, the debt service payments that we are making in interest, for instance, over half of our countries, African countries, spend more on interest payments than on health or education. So basically, you can say these countries are making interest payments or making debt service payments and defaulting on the development expenditures, health, education, etc. And of course, you could even say that they're not doing what they should do in terms of climate finance, etc. So that is the background behind this African Leaders Debt Relief Initiative. So it recognizes that, but also recognizes that in order to move forward, we need a comprehensive debt relief for the countries that are most in need. At this moment, there are proposals that require the countries to come one by one, right? But the African leaders have proposed a comprehensive view, comprehensive look at all the countries together, and then provide the space that would then lead them to make expenditures on development. It's not charity, it is what is needed to push our countries forward.
You're talking about the fact that it is not charity, and of course, looking at the G20, you do have a mixture of developing and developed nations. And I'd just like to know at this point if there is an optimistic mood from the developed nations to actually provide support for African nations at this time.
The African leaders met with the African leaders behind this initiative, met with the president of the Republic of South Africa, who, as you know, is leading the charge in the G20 presidency. And he welcomed this initiative and endorsed it. He realizes and understood how it will play out going forward. Now, the role of the African leaders, or what they intend to do over the next, let's say, few months, is really to play that advocacy role, to sensitize and indeed have discussions with each of those leaders in the G20. But beyond the G20, we also have to do it in Africa, meaning in the context of the African Union, and indeed in other fora such as the Bretton Woods sort of meetings that do take place. So the objective here is to begin on this advocacy and sensitization, and eventually there will be sort of a coalition around the table that would push this forward.
And also, I mean, this initiative also seeks to create an ecosystem with more favorable borrowing terms for Africa. What does that framework need to look like?
So the framework that is being proposed relates first and foremost, the big element here is debt relief. That is what will provide the fiscal space to do all those other expenditures that I mentioned. Mm-hmm. However, along with this, there has to be other, let's say, other improvements that are in the financial architecture, in the financial arrangements that we have to do, we have today. So, for instance, the cost of borrowing.
Yes.
So in terms of the new borrowing, that would need to be at better terms, that is reduction of the so-called premium that we as African countries pay. Secondly, even in terms of the terms of those loans, the new loans. So how that would work out, I think that is not what the African leaders are pushing for at this moment, because there are multiple, let's say, solutions to this, and there are many things that can be done to lead to the same conclusion. But I think you should also be aware that these African leaders have individually have made statements about some of those things, but collectively they are open to any of the options that would lead to the lowering of interest rate and indeed the overall cost of borrowing.
And in terms of new borrowing as well, is there a way that Africa can be more discerning in terms of where it seeks credit from?
Excellent question. I think we need to be more discerning. There's no doubt about that. And I think this is something that all of us have to improve in, first and foremost in terms of how this relates to the projects that we are putting the money in, and how effective are those projects, and both financially but economically. So the rates of return, etc. That is one. The second, of course, is the currencies and the terms that maybe we need to be more discerning, but more, let's be better in terms of financial negotiations in this regard. And then obviously things like the currencies, I mentioned that. But I think the point here is that, the sources of these funds.
Yes.
At this moment, maybe there has been concerns that we are no longer borrowing from the traditional capital markets, right? And we've maybe moved to other non-traditional sort of sources of those capital. But I think the point here is that we need to be discerning and understand how each of those, let's say, dollar or whatever we borrow, how far does it go? We need to be much more efficient and much more discerning in this regard.
And just lastly, as we wrap up this conversation, Governor, I mean, just in terms of the muscle that African governments need to strengthen within themselves to develop self-help measures, how can they do that in order to dig themselves out of these debt woes?
I think first, we have to acknowledge that Africa does have the human capacity to do that. There's no doubt about it in my mind. We do have people who can, we can go face to face or mano a mano, if you may, with the lenders in any capital in the world. So that to me is very clear. I think the issue here is just to make sure that they are the ones that are calling the shots, and those shots are not being called for political ends or, let's say, agreements that have been signed or reached from political perspectives only, but rather we also need to make sure that the financial suitability of those programs or those investments are actually appropriate. So I have nothing to say except the highest marks in terms of the human capacity that we have in Africa. Of course, there are some countries in Africa that probably don't have as much as say, the leading countries. But I think that is something that can be helped. And I think also the African Development Bank and other such institutions in our region can support those countries that need that support.
Well, thank you so much for your time and for your insights there on this very, very important issue, Governor. That was the former Governor of the Central Bank of Kenya, Patrick Njoroge.